Guys. This week we are starting with ecology, which is the study of how the environment works and the different organisms and how they interact with each other, and also how humans interact with their environment. Thrown in there too. So this video is just kind of an intro to ecology, and just kind of talks about the basics. Ecology is a really broad science, and it is often like a whole semester of college. So just know that this is like very surface level and the super basics. So I wanted to start out by talking about the levels of organization, which this is kind of similar to how the levels of organization are in the human anatomy. We talked about how cells form tissues and tissues form organs, organs form organ systems, and then that forms organ systems together form a whole organism. So now we're kind of picking up where the organism is the lowest level now, and which is one another. So you actually can connect like the smallest unit of life, which is just one cell, all the way up to the biosphere, which is the entire globe interacting, which is pretty cool. Like all life is definitely connected and interrelated. So just want to throw that in there. All right, so levels of organization in ecology. The smallest is the organism. So this is going to be just one individual organism. So not even one species. It's literally like there is one bottlenose dolphin swimming, or just one of that organism. When you have multiple of that species together, that's called the population. So this is a group of individuals of the same species. And they'll be living in the same geographic area. So you could say, like, the population of squirrels in my backyard or whatever. And that's the group of squirrels that are interacting with one another in your backyard. Obviously, we talk a lot about the human population. We can talk about the global human population because we're able to. We have brains that can process that. But when we talk about animals, usually they are a population that's in the same like geographical area together. When you put together multiple populations, it equals a community. This is several populations interacting. And I'll talk about this in just a minute, but I have this arrow that's coming down here because when we talk about food chains and food webs, those are communities that are making up those chains and webs. An ecosystem is all of the both biotic and abiotic factors in an area. I'll talk about those words in just a second if you've forgotten them. An ecosystem is all living and non-living factors that make up an environment. So it will include the community of animals and plants that are there, but it also will include like if there's a river or the climate or like the rock formations, the non-living factors are also included. And that will take me briefly to this side note up here, which is about abiotic and biotic factors. Biotic just means living. I don't know why I was going to write a B there. I was going to write biotic again. Living. Abiotic is non-living. And both will have really large factors on the ecosystem and the individuals that are living there. So biotic is going to be, other animals or plants. Abiotic is going to be things like the amount of sunlight, the water sources, the climate, those sorts of things. Okay, go back over here. All right, so all the ecosystems together on Earth make up the biosphere. This is all living things slash global ecosystem. And then I did just want to mention biomes, which I'm sure that you've learned about biomes before, but did want to mention that they are large ecosystems that share similar climates. So on Earth, there are 7 major biomes, and those are going to be things like ours is a temperate deciduous forest, or a rainforest, or a tundra. Those sorts of large overarching climate zones are called biomes, and they're super large ecosystems. Um, yeah, so that's a biome. Okay. Wanted to do a quick overview of chains and webs because they are an option for your like exploration assignment this week. So I'm sure that this was a review for probably all of you, but did want to do a refresher. So a food chain is just a line. This animal eats this animal eats this animal. One thing about food chains and webs is that the arrow will always point where the energy is flowing. So the animal that is consuming the previous one, the arrow will point towards the predator. So in this example, let's say that A is a plant. In ecology, we call plants producers. And also the plant, of course, is an autotroph, which, friendly reminder, is it makes its own food. So then the arrow is showing that the energy will flow towards organism B. We'll call organism B an insect. So the insect is eating the plant. This, because it's the first consumer, is called the primary consumer. And then it's also going to be called an heterotroph because it's eating something else. It can't make its own food. And when we have heterotrophs, we can classify them into either herbivores, omnivores, or carnivores. So in this situation, it will be a herbivore because it ate the plant, which makes it a herbivore. And then C, let's say C is a bird. The bird will be a secondary consumer because it's second thing to be a consumer. And it is also a heterotroph. And it is a carnivore. Now, because this chain is really simple, we don't know. The bird could be an omnivore, but the chain doesn't really show that. It only shows 1, 2, 3. What I'm going to show you next, a food web, does show things that are omnivores, which means they eat both plants and also other animals. So that's a food chain, super simple. Now we'll look at a food web. So here's a food web. The letters represent different organisms. I'll switch to a color that's not already on the web as I label it. All right, so the food web is organized by increasing energy level. So, well, kind of decreasing energy level because the things at the bottom are actually the highest energy organisms. Because remember, we talked about previously how only 10% of the energy actually gets passed up to as they eat. So the biggest consumer, the apex predator, will be at the top, but the organisms that like contain the highest energy will be at the bottom, the plants. So let me just go through and label this. I'll start at the bottom. So down at the bottom will be the producers will always be, unless they're algae, because remember, algae is not actually a plant, but um, they will be down at the bottom if they are autotrophs. These, so A, B, and C are all, I don't want to use arrows. I'll just say A, B, and C. They are the highest energy. Because their energy comes directly from the sun, which is the ultimate source of energy for all living things. So, because they're doing photosynthesis, they're getting the sun's very first direct energy. They are the highest energy things, which is why, if you think all the way back to the very beginning of the year, we talked about carbohydrates and how fruits and vegetables are carbs, and carbs are your quickest energy source to eat. And that's why, because they got their energy straight from the sun. So, those are the producers. Now, the next level up, this is going to be D and E. Let's see, D and E. These are going to be your primary consumers. And they're also herbivores. Because the only things that they're eating are the producers. They're only eating plants. F is an omnivore. So if I look here, which means it eats both plants, it's eating A. Oh, wait, no, it's actually an herbivore, but I'm going to make it an omnivore because I wanted something to be an omnivore. So it's going to also be D. All right, so there we go. Now it's an omnivore. It's eating both the plant A and some sort of small animal, probably, which is D. So the interesting thing about this is that you could consider it to be a primary consumer if you look at this first arrow, or you could consider it to be a secondary consumer if you look to D, to F. So you count the number of arrows to decide what level of consumer it is. So I'm going to call it a secondary because I'm going to follow this arrow 1 and this arrow 2. Call it secondary. F and H eat each other. So they have a predator prey sort of relationship going on. H, I'm going to call another secondary consumer. Because it's eating E, so that's one arrow, and E ate B, so that's the second arrow. So that's why it's secondary. This one is going to be a carnivore because it's not eating any plant matter. G is at the top. So this guy is going to be the apex predator. There will usually only be one apex predator. Sometimes there will be two, but usually only one. And that's because there is not enough energy in the ecosystem to sustain a ton of predators. Because remember, they're only getting 10% of the energy out of their food, and their food only got 10% of their energy out of their food, which means that by the time you get to that level, you are having to eat a lot in order to sustain your life. So usually you're going to not see very many of these apex predators, and even within the apex predator population, it's going to stay probably pretty small because there just isn't enough food to support a lot of them. This apex predator, I'm going to call a tertiary consumer. Tertiary means third level. I'll use a different color to show that. It could be secondary if you follow from B to D and D to G. But I'm going to call it tertiary because I'm going to go from G to H, I'll call that 1. H to E, I'm going to call that 2. E to B, I'm going to call that 3. So that's tertiary consumer. And then also a carnivore. You also could, let's see, could it be quaternary? Let's see, 1, 2, 3. No, it's tertiary no matter what. But if you counted 4 arrows, that's called quaternary, which makes 4. Now, one thing that's not shown on this food web, which is worth mentioning, is that obviously eventually all of these things will die. They'll be eaten then by a decomposer. So a lot of times decomposers aren't shown on food webs, but you can show them. Those would be things like bacteria, fungi, like a buzzard or a vulture. Those are decomposers that eat dead or decaying material. So eventually all of these things will be consumed by the decomposer and kind of be recycled again, circle of life. So that's a food web. That wasn't like a super clear description. So I did link another food web video that's on the exploration for this week that will give you like real examples with real animals, which I think will help clarify if you're feeling a little bit lost. But just remember, if you're drawing your own food web, that the arrows always point towards where the energy is flowing. So they'll always point towards the top. Yeah, I think that's the number one thing that my students usually get backwards if they get something backwards. So thanks so much for watching. More ecology coming up next week, but that's it for this one. And see you soon. Bye.